Good morning. Welcome everyone and Happy New Year to you all. Thank you for joining us today for the global launch event of an urgently needed new financing tool, the Funding Window for Women Human Rights Defenders, established by the United Nations Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. My name is Nala Valji, and I'm here in my capacity as the Global Coordinator of the Spotlight Initiative, a close partner of the WPHF. And I am pleased to join you today to moderate this timely launch event. Today, we're here to recognize the invaluable contribution of women human rights defenders around the world. No one can deny the sacrifices that they make, the life-threatening risks that they overcome, and the resilience that they bring to their work to defend rights, secure justice, and build peace on the front lines. But even more important than honoring their efforts with words, today, we'll be discussing the actions we can all take to support their critical needs and the urgent imperative to accelerate financing for their protection and participation. Before we get started, allow me to give a special welcome and thank you to the governments of Norway and Germany for joining us today and for their contributions to the WPHF and their leadership in making this new funding window possible. It is my honor to welcome three brilliant women civil society activists joining us today from Afghanistan, Myanmar, and Libya. It is their experience and expertise that must remain central to the discussions that drive our global responses, and we are thrilled to learn from you and hear from you today. I'd also like to thank the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom for your partnership, and of course, UN Women as the fund coordinator and secretariat for your leadership. For those of you engaging in our conversation on social media, be sure to follow and tag WPHF on Twitter at WPH Fund. And don't forget to use your event hashtag support WHRDs in your posts. Today's event is being live streamed on UN Web TV and recorded, which will be made available on the WPHF YouTube channel following the event. It is now my sincere pleasure to hand over to our first speaker, Norway's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Her Excellency Ms. Anakin Hitfield, for her opening remarks. Minister, over to you.
Thank you. First, let me extend a warm welcome to everyone attending this global digital launch. I would like to thank our co-host and particularly the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund for establishing this window. Last fall, 373 feminist organizations from 88 countries called on and the UN. They wanted to do more to protect and support women peace builders and human rights defenders. They asked for practical resources for those at grave risk. Today, we join together to discuss prevention and response strategies, as well as available resources. Norway has decided to seed fund this important program, and we encourage others to join. When women participate, peace and security improves. But women's participation comes at a high risk, and no price is higher than for women peace builders and human rights defenders. Therefore, we must improve protection measures for women who participate. And that is what this program is all about. Effective relief for women that are risking it all for their families, their communities, and their countries. Whether in form of health services, short-term housing, reallocation, or livelihood support. Security first is a flawed idea. If security and peace is the aim, women's participation is a fundamental part of it. It is about giving us all a peace that matters, that includes and lasts. Therefore, as President of the Security Council, Norway will host an open debate on protecting women's participation later today. Focus will be on finding ways to address targeted violence against women in peace and security processes. Our hope is that we will be able to better protect participation. Thank you very much.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your remarks and for for the leadership of Norway. As you mentioned, the Security Council debate later this morning, the first of its kind on this issue, and I have no doubt that advocacy and calls to action for the support to WPHF and this new window will be part of that open debate as well. So thank you. Indeed, there can be no peace without the meaningful and inclusive participation of women and their organizations. And this means ensuring that women's activism does not come at the cost of their own lives. We will now turn to Germany's Minister of State, His Excellency Dr. Tobias Lindner, for his opening remarks. Minister, over to you.
Thank you so much, Excellencies, delegates, civil society representatives, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be here today, and I'm very glad to see you all gathered to support women human rights defenders. Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has asked me to welcome you and to commend you for your important work. There are so many incredible, courageous women all over the world standing up for their rights under the most difficult circumstances of war and conflict, risking their lives and sometimes even losing them. Let's remember Frozan Safi, who was murdered at the age of 29 last November in northern Afghanistan. Let's remember Hanan el-Barasi, who was killed in Benghazi by 30 bullets at the same month. Let's remember Berta Caraces, assassinated in her house in La Esperanza, Honduras in 2016. These women stood up for land rights, women's rights, LGBTIQ rights, and environmental protection. They challenged war economies and existing power structures. They organized grassroots movements and spoke out against sexist and racist discrimination. There are so many more such women, well-known and unknown. It is important that we honor women like Frozan, Hanan, and Berta, and that we support those who follow in their footsteps despite the danger. Supporting the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is one way of doing that. I'm very happy that the WPHF received considerably more resources this year. The new funding window that we are launching today with a special focus on Afghanistan has a specific purpose, offering unbureaucratic assistance to individual women human rights defenders and peace builders who are struggling to make a living or who had to leave their countries because of death threats. Today, Afghanistan is probably one of the most difficult environments for women human rights defenders. The aspirations, rights, and opportunities of a whole generation of women and girls are in jeopardy after the takeover by the Taliban. Therefore, I am delighted that Germany provides €2 million for the new funding window to support Afghan women human rights defenders, both inside and outside the country. It is crucial that we don't abandon these courageous women. Since coming into office in December, my Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock has made this issue a top priority. It is one of the central elements of Germany's new Afghanistan action plan. Let me conclude by assuring you that Germany will remain a steadfast supporter of women human rights defenders across the globe. Please join us in supporting women fighting for peace, equality, and a safer world. Thank you for your attention.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for your remarks, for that announcement of your generous contribution with regards to the new window and support to Afghan women human rights defenders, your call to action for others to support, and particularly for reminding us of the individual women and their stories that we are here today to support. It's now my particular pleasure to introduce to you UN Women's new Executive Director, Ms. Seema Bahush. Ms. Bahush, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Excellency Minister of Foreign Affairs of Norway, Excellency Minister of State of Germany, UN Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights, Excellencies, representatives from government, civil society, and the United Nations, women, human rights defenders from around the world. It is my honor to be with you today as part of the global launch of the new funding window of the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund for Women Human Rights Defenders. I would like to thank the government of Norway for your thought leadership in the Security Council and beyond on this issue and for your support. And also to thank the government of Germany for your strong commitment to supporting women peace builders worldwide, which makes you the largest contributor to date to the fund. In 2021, we saw an alarming escalation of protracted crises and conflicts across the world, such as in Syria and in Yemen. Recent unrest has perpetuated grave instability in Afghanistan, in Myanmar, Ethiopia, and Sudan. At the forefront of these crises are women human rights defenders, women who risk their lives daily to protect fundamental rights and defend the needs of their communities. These women human rights defenders continue to be exposed and targeted, persistent and repeated violence, often with the aim of discrediting their work, defending rights and justice, and forcibly excluding them from decision-making processes. This past year, the rapid reversal of women's rights in Afghanistan made women's gains in political and public life another casualty of the Taliban control. In the month leading up to the August 2021 takeover by the Taliban, the UN documented a record number of women killed in country, including civil society activists and journalists. The increased targeting of women human rights defenders is strongly correlated to an escalation in conflict and is yet another barrier to the pursuit of lasting peace. Support for women human rights defenders on the front lines is therefore central to advancing not only the women peace and security agenda, but the entire peace and security pillar of our charter. As we will hear today from civil society speakers, women human rights defenders play a critical role during and after conflict. They gather data on rights abuses, monitor the activity of duty bearers, and hold unique insights into shifts on the ground, all to help prevent conflict and further destabilization. Despite their critical contributions, and with the additional burden of COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing the rights of women and girls further deprioritized and fewer resources available for the protection and participation of women human rights defenders. Today, I urge all of us to step up and take action. The valuable roles and contributions of women human rights defenders should be acknowledged and matched with dedicated protection measures and financing for their leadership and participation. UN Women has put in place a series of measures to respond to these increasing needs. Today, we are launching a very concrete new mechanism that we have contributed to establishing as the Secretariat of the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, the new funding window on women human rights defenders. This new window will address a critical gap in funding for women human rights defenders and will contribute to the international community's commitment to supporting their work. Let me again please thank Norway and Germany for their leadership and for their support, and I am looking forward to seeing others join us in this effort. Thank you.
Thank you, ED, for your insights and commitment, and to UN Women for providing the leadership and home for this important fund. Political will and financial support are needed more than ever to protect women human rights defenders and enhance women's leadership and peace and security settings. And it is our shared responsibility to do more to support them. Let us now turn our attention from the fund and its important role to hear directly from women human rights defenders themselves. Women human rights defenders' contributions to peace are too often and too easily overlooked. This lack of recognition of their work impedes their access to support from international institutions and donors, which further heightens their risks and vulnerabilities to threats and attacks. Joining us today is May Sabe Phew, a women human rights defender from Myanmar. Ms. Phew, thank you for being here today. What do you see as the main risks for women human rights defenders? And how do these risks impact their vital work? Ms. Sabe, do we have you?
Hello. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. The Excellencies, fellows women, human rights defenders, and peace builders from around the world. It's my honor to share a few stories about myself and my fellow women human rights defenders, which demonstrates the main risks women human rights defenders face. When the military council attempted to stage a coup in Myanmar, a national crisis erupted. Many women human rights defenders, peace activists, and unionists are at risk of being arrested, and demand for safe houses outstrips the supply when the junta deploys massive raids and arrests nightly. The lucky ones would just be in prison. The unlucky ones suffer sexual violence as a method of torture during their interrogation and sometimes were killed. Many of us found ourselves cashless and homeless and had to flee with small children without having safe and secure electronic devices with which to connect with our fellow persecuted who lack access to legal aid. Some of our women human rights defenders even had to navigate a difficult journey with their elderly parents and children in tow. This multi-generational exodus of women human rights defenders through a treacherous terrain out of Myanmar is common for women human rights defenders because of the work that we do. We are not outlaws or criminals, much less fugitives, but when the tyranny tried to take control of the country, we stood the ground of justice, human rights, and freedom, and for this, we are treated in this manner. On 8th of March 2021, on International Women's Day, when we marched on the street of Yangon, the security forces surrounded us and tried to arrest many women activists. We hid in a room throughout the night with a group of young women activists. As we exchanged views on the gender-specific challenges and increased risks that women human rights defenders must face, we noted how our society is fixed on the gender division of roles between the domestic and public spheres. When a man picks up his bag to join the revolution, he is celebrated as a hero, and it's recognized that he has to abandon his family for the fight for national freedom and justice. If a woman does this, according to Myanmar's prevailing social norms and expectations, she is an irresponsible mother, wife, and daughter. Women peace builders are scorned for their peace-building work and face various gender challenges time and again, including myself. I dare say that our experiences are not too different from those of our sisters from other conflict-affected areas. The impacts of above-mentioned risks and insecurities hinder women's participation in the political sphere, and it sends the message to other women that defending human rights put their family and loved ones at risk. Even if a woman human rights defender is not afraid to take her own risks, she would be more relevant when it comes to the safety and security of her parents and children. Other impacts include self-censoring and not being able to as bold and effective in their human rights work any longer. Present available financial support for relocation of individual human rights defenders must be broadened in scope, given that women defenders and peace builders have family duties that they cannot easily abandon, including care for minor and elderly dependents within the family. These family members should also be given protection, since the junta is deliberately targeting elderly parents and children as young as 4 years old. One other thing is that the current available urgent funds are characterized as one of relocation and transport to safe house fees. As the junta seized the assets and frozen the bank accounts of women human rights defenders, one-off assistance is not viable and enough for women human rights defenders to continue their defending work. Keeping women human rights defenders afloat and alive are priorities that I would like to highlight. This window about to be launched gives me ample hope. With this, I end my intervention. Thank you.
Ms. Abe, thank you so much for your remarks and for sharing with us those experiences, and for also just making it so clear the way in which gender discrimination and norms are used against women human rights defenders and the protection that is needed to support their full participation in building peaceful societies. Thank you. I'd now like to turn over to, we have the honor of having with us today a young woman peace activist from Libya, Hajer Sharif. She is the co-founder of Together We Build It. Women human rights defenders face insurmountable risks and threats to advance peace and human rights in their communities. Hajer, can you tell us, why is flexible funding for these women, including young women, so critical to continuing their advocacy work?
Of course. Well, thank you so much, Nahla, for posing this important question. And it's great to see many familiar and inspiring faces. Now, to your question about why flexible funding is important. For me, I believe that anyone who lived through a war or had a loved one go through a war, or who did not live through a war but is capable of putting themselves in the shoes of someone who did, then without me saying, they will understand why flexible funding is important. But in any case, it is critical because such a mechanism will give an opportunity to women human rights defenders and women peace builders an opportunity to survive. Because providing funding for women human rights defenders and women peace builders should be as if you are saving someone from drowning. What do? You throw them a life belt without the need to fill out paperwork, without the need to sit down and consider whether these are eligible costs, without the need to sit down and trying to figure out under which project it fits, without the need of asking them to fill out forms with indicators, outcomes, and outputs, without the need for lengthy due diligence processes, and without the need for long processing times. In other words, desperate times necessitate quick decisions rather than time-consuming paperwork. Another reason is actually context. The context varies from a place to another, and it even varies from a woman to another woman within even the same city. For an example, the risk of being arrested by an authoritarian regime differs from the risk of being kidnapped by an armed group or assassinated in the middle of the day by armed men. I'm not saying one requires more attention than the other, but being flexible allows a mechanism to be context specific and cover various security risks. Let me give you an example. A friend of mine was recently in a very dangerous situation, and that was actually as a result because of her peace building work. And she couldn't return to the country, so she had to stay outside for a while. Of course, we reached out to various groups in order to figure out how could we assist her. And we found some mechanisms that could offer her some help. Unfortunately, the help that she was offered was ineffective for her case. For an example, one group offered to pay her for her lawyer's fees or for a lawyer's fees. But when your safety is jeopardized in Libya, a lawyer cannot help you. So paying someone for a lawyer fees doesn't really do much. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that many women human rights defenders and many women peace builders operate with no safety net at all. Even those who have organizations and run funded projects, the majority of them lack long-term sustainable funding. As a result, when their security is at risk, they literally have nothing to fall back on. Now, the final point that I would like to make is that there should be trust in women human rights defenders and in women peace builders. What I mean by trust is that the standard should be how can we support them rather than how can we ensure the funds is accounted for. That is significant and important for donors, of course, but the design of such funding mechanism should be motivated by solidarity and support rather than how to fit it into accounting procedures. So I'm very excited to hear about this new mechanism, and I'm quite sure that it will be able to help many women who need it. Thank you.
Hajra, thank you so much for your remarks, and you made so many important points, but I just want to highlight one thing that you said, and the importance and the logic of flexible funding really is a lifeline in an urgent situation without asking for the paperwork. And I think that's just such a great way to characterize what this new window that we're launching today is all about. So thank you, Hajra. In the past 6 months, thousands of Afghan women leaders have been confronted with a heart-wrenching dilemma, either to hide in their own country or to live in exile. Yet all remain committed to protecting and promoting women's rights. Joining us today is Zarka Yatali, Director of the Women and Children Legal Research Foundation in Afghanistan. Zarka, can you tell us, based on your experience and recent consultations, what type of support is needed for Afghan women human rights defenders, both inside and outside Afghanistan, to continue their important advocacy work for women's rights?
Thank you so much. Good morning, Excellency and dear colleagues. I am very happy that I'm here among all of you, and it is very pleasure that WPHF Fund is going to launch a new window for support of women HRD and women peacemakers and conflict countries. And I hope that this time it will be very important and could do and provide opportunity and support for those women HRDs and women peace builders, which really have needs. Regarding to your question, right now in Afghanistan, a woman peacemaker and women HRDs need to be supported in the different areas. I am going to emphasize about situation of those women that they are still in Afghanistan and what is their need, and also those women that they are outside of Afghanistan and what is their need, what should we do for them, and also those women that they are in the second and third country and are facing with lots of problems in the third or second countries. First of all, I'm going to point about those women leaders, women HRDs and women peacemakers that they are still in Afghanistan. They are with lots of problems. They are with lots of risk. Every day there is a threat, life threat for them and their families, but still they are raising their voice and they are protesting. Unfortunately, today we had another cases of a civil society activist that she was killed in one of the provinces of Afghanistan today, unfortunately. And it is the new cases of killing of an activist and civil society activists in the province by the Taliban. So there are lots of cases like this for those women that they are still in Afghanistan. But what kind of support those women needed, and how can WPHF can help them? Honestly, for those women that they are still in Afghanistan, especially those HRDs and peacemakers, sometimes when they are facing with some threats and high risk, there isn't at least a safe place or a safe shelter for them and their families to be a while in this safe place and to protect their lives, their family lives. Inside of this, some of HRDs and women peacemakers that they are still in Afghanistan, they need for financial support. They need for financial support, as we all know that all of the women lost their jobs in Afghanistan and they lost their income in Afghanistan. There isn't any financial income resource for all of those women that they work as a employee of a non NGO or as an employee of government. But now they don't have any job, they don't have any income, and they don't have any financial resource. So it is very important that WPHF can identify and can support those women that they are already with facing with risk and also with or an economical crisis. So this fund can provide them lots of opportunity and lots of support. And then I think WPHF can help and support those women HRDs and women peace builders, which are in the second and third countries. As I am in contact with lots of those women, they really are very in bad situation. They are facing with lots of financial crisis. Even some of them even don't have any resource to find a safe accommodation for them or to provide food for them and their families. And also those women want to continue their works from the second or third countries. Unfortunately, they don't have even they don't have even laptops. They don't have any kind of to be connected with the world, with other women which is outside of the country or those women which is inside of the country. So I think providing of accommodation and also other financial support for those women is very important, as they have done a lot for gender equality and also providing the space for women in Afghanistan, but now they are facing with lots of problems in the second and third countries. And the last fund for those women that they are in the outside of Afghanistan, especially those women that they left country after 15th of August because of coming of the Taliban and because of the threat and risk that they faced for their safety and security for themselves and their families. As we all know, lots of women that are still outside of Afghanistan, they are working a lot. They are advocating and lobbying for women's rights and also for providing some opportunity and want to raise the voice of those women that they are still in Afghanistan and facing with lots of violation and of their rights. So those women also has needed for WPHF fund, because those women that they are still engaged with the situation of Afghanistan, there should be provide the opportunity for them to be in all of the delegation, those delegation that is going in the different countries to talk and to discuss about the situation of Afghanistan. And also those women should be part of all decision making regarding the situation and also regarding to the future of Afghanistan, especially regarding to the future of women of Afghanistan. So this WPHF fund can provide this kind of opportunity and this kind of support for those women that are outside of Afghanistan, and they can play a role, a very positive role in bringing change in the situation of all women around in Afghanistan, especially those women that they are still in Afghanistan. But I have a suggestion as well. As WPHF is a very good resource to support women HRD and women peacemaker. In Afghanistan, one of the problem that we had in the past, it was that those women that they have really needed they have really need to support with WPHF fund, but they don't have information and they don't have aware about such kind of funding, about such kind of support that that support can support them and can protect them, can provide them some opportunity and saving their lives. So it is very important that it should be published and it should be distributed among different networks and among all people around the world, a large number of people around the world. Then I am sure that those women that they have need and those are those people that they need to support, they can apply and they could find the ways that how they can reach to this kind of fund, and then through this they support them and their families, and then they can find some safety and financial support for themselves and also their families. And I hope that this time those women can access, and WPHF team can provide the opportunity for those women that they really need, and we should all support them, especially those women that they are inside of Afghanistan and they always asking from the world to be with them and to support with them always. Once again, thank you so much for providing the opportunity, and I hope that one day we be announced the achievement and the supported of WPHF fund with very needy people of Afghanistan, especially women of Afghanistan. Thank you so much.
Zarka, thank you so much for your remarks and your insights, for sharing with us the need to provide support for Afghan women human rights defenders and their situation, which is compounded by the economic situation for those inside and the economic situation of those who have fled to exile. And I think also just taking up your point about the need for us all to really communicate about the availability of this important window and this important fund. Thank you for your remarks. It's now my pleasure to turn to a dear friend and colleague, Madeleine Rees, the Secretary General of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Madeleine, we often hear speeches about the importance of women's meaningful participation in peace and security contexts. But with recent developments in Afghanistan, Myanmar, Sudan, Libya, we are witnessing an unprecedented increase in calls for support and protection from women human rights defenders to continue their advocacy work in these fragile settings. How can we expect to see more women leading peace and security matters in conflict and crisis affected countries without doing more for their protection? And what are the immediate steps that need to be taken? Madeleine, over to you.
Thanks, Nan. Thanks everyone for being on this call. It's really good to see so much emphasis finally being put on the importance of women human rights defenders and what needs to be done. I think it's a great question, because women have always tried to be part of peace processes, always have been part of defending human rights. And I think even without the protection, it's still going to happen. They have, they will, and it continues. And that, I think, is testimony to the importance that we should be attaching to the role that women play. That said, why should they? Why should women go to spaces like the UN Security Council when they are intimidated and harassed and without any form of accountability? So I think we have to be far more intelligent in how we approach this. This fund is really important for all the reasons that speakers, especially Hajer, has outlined, that there is then an ability to access ways of getting better protection, better security. It won't be enough. And my question is, who is giving succor to the states who are enabling the persecution of human rights defenders? How is it that we, in this day and age, in 2022, we are still talking about dealing with counterterrorism, enabling, facilitating the arms trade, dealing with the training of militarized security, dealing with the political support and investment that is given to the states who are persecuting women human rights defenders? And this is the big question we've got to be asking ourselves. Where does that accountability lie? We've got to do several things in order to enable women to continue to participate. We need to focus on prevention by addressing those root causes. We need to look at in-country and gender equality, the political economy within that, and what can be done to facilitate gender equality, which, as we know, documented, decreases the possibility of violence erupting. We need to do more on the Security Council. And I'm so glad that Norway is on the Security Council and is championing this issue, because there are huge issues in evasion of responsibilities within the Security Council, both as states, but also in relation to those big issues that we're talking about. There's only one Security Council resolution which vaguely mentions women, human rights defenders, and the whole women, peace and security panoply of different resolutions. And I think that's another thing that we must really be looking at, and that is the fulsome implementation of the women, peace and security agenda and the resolutions by states, but also by the UN. It's not good enough that envoys can ignore women human rights defenders when they are when they are actually creating peace processes, and just tokenistically bring women in when they feel they've got a tick box. Which brings me to the other part that I think is really, really important, is this continuum of protection, which is actually a recognition by the UN. When the UN does start engaging with women, there's recognition, there's status, and it's meaningful for women to be able to continue to participate. So there's a whole list of different things that could and should be done. This fund is an integrated part of that, mustn't ever be seen as the panacea for protection, because it's not. It's an immediate rescue support network or support system that needs to be put in place, but it's got to be done within a broader context of accountability and prevention.
Madeleine, thank you very much for your remarks. And let me just thank you, Zarka, Hajer, Mayhew, for your incredible work and for highlighting the importance of supporting women human rights defenders and their contributions to peace. Let me now turn to Rita El-Khiari, head of the WPHF Secretariat. Rita, we heard how urgently protection and advocacy support is needed for women human rights defenders to continue contributing to building peace and gender equality. Today, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is launching a new funding window focused on supporting women human rights defenders' protection and participation. Can you tell us more about this mechanism and how it will support these women?
Yes, thank you very much. And I would also like to thank you personally for being here today. We are very proud of our partnership with the Spotlight Initiative to support women's organizations fighting sexual and gender-based violence in crisis settings. And the launch of this new window on women human rights defenders today is, I believe, a continuation of our joint work on the protection and participation of women and girls in crisis context. So thank you. As you know, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund is a multi-partner trust fund that has been supporting over 450 women's organizations in crisis countries. And we're absolutely thrilled to be launching this new funding mechanism today that will be complementing our overall funding structure. As we heard from our really amazing panelists, 2021 was a very difficult year for women peace builders and human rights defenders. And WHRDs in conflict and crisis settings are constantly adapting to new and evolving threats, which is why this new financing mechanism was designed to be flexible and responsive to their urgent and developing changing needs. Last summer, as WPHF was trying to contribute to the Afghanistan crisis response, where we have actually provided emergency evacuation allowances to 17 women human rights defenders and, to your point, all of you, and their 21 dependents through our rapid response window on women and peace processes, we realized that there was a gap in our funding structure and the type of support that we provide to the women we serve. In the past, the fund has been able to support women's organizations in crisis settings with both programmatic and institutional funding to build peace and provide humanitarian response. In the past, WPHF has also been able to support women's participation in track 1 and track 2 processes through a rapid response mechanism. But what WPHF has not been able to do is to enable, or at the minimum facilitate, individual women peace builders and human rights defenders' ability to continue to carry out their work safely, and at the same time convey their messages to the right audiences to ad hoc advocacy opportunities. And this is exactly what this funding window, this new funding mechanism, aims to do. So we carried out a series of consultations with human rights defenders and NGOs who support them to identify the needs, the gaps, and the best practices, we also obviously undertook a mapping of existing efforts in order to avoid duplication. And from these consultations, it was very clear that the needs were significant and that the response had to be not only rapid, but also flexible, to be efficient and to cover the variety of risks and need of WHRDs. The risks, as we know, they vary across countries and depend on the fact that women are still inside on the front line or had to relocate to a third country for their safety, or even, to Madeleine's point earlier, had just briefed the UN and are facing retaliation. Needs are also wide and include financial support for livelihood, equipment, continuation of their advocacy work, access to mental health care, relocation allowances, amongst many others. A common request that was also underlined by our panelists was to provide support to the dependents and families of WHRDs who are at risk due to their work, and women human rights defenders, very understandably, often do not accept support if it means leaving their family and dependents behind. So the new WPHF window will provide support to women human rights defenders from crisis and conflict-affected areas, in particular countries on the agenda of the Security Council. Specific focus will be given to Afghanistan in the initial phase, as mentioned by the Minister of State from Germany, with more than half of the funding dedicated to this country alone in the beginning. We will be receiving requests on a rolling basis through a simplified application process, which will be accessible in different languages on the mobile phones and internet website through a safe online platform. The WPHF funding window for women human rights defenders will also be providing flexible fundings to human rights defenders to support both their participation and protection, and not one at the cost of the other. And this is a very important point that we have heard across all of our consultations. The first pillar will be about providing a safety net through flexible funding to cover urgent costs, livelihood, protection, internet, mental health care, legal service, vacation services. Protection being seen not only about physical security, but also about the sustainability of the work of the women human rights defenders, anything that enabled them to continue to carry out their work. The second pillar will be providing participation and advocacy support through direct logistical assistance to enhance their meaningful participation and advocacy in relevant events, meetings, and spaces to be able to build inclusive peace. So the window will be open in the spring, and I would like also to extend our heartfelt thanks to Norway and Germany for their thought leadership in this space, also for agreeing to fund this very innovative mechanism. We hope to see obviously others join us in the near future and to extend to the women peace builders and human rights defenders the support they need and they deserve. I would like to also thank, if I may, our amazing funding board composed of 12 dedicated members from the civil society member states and the UN for their strategic advice all along the design process of this window. We very much look forward to starting the work soon. All of you, this will be work in progress. We will be assessing as we go, and we will rely on the wise advice of our partners, including the women that we have heard today, to help us to be fit for the purpose we're trying to achieve. Thank you so much.
Rita, thank you so much for that, for giving us a sense of this new funding window and mechanism and how it will operate. And let me also just take this opportunity to highlight here the amazing work that you and your team have done in the past 6 years in growing WPHF, ensuring it is always evolving and responding to needs, whether a rapid response window for peace processes, responding to COVID, or the WHRD focus that we are launching here today. The support WPHF provides to women civil society leaders in conflict and crisis affected countries across the globe is both unique and invaluable. And it's this reason that we are here today, to really welcome this urgently needed financing mechanism and encourage the member states to support this effort. Just before we move on to the next speaker, I've had a brief request from Madeleine just to come back in here for one moment. And so Madeleine, I'm handing back to you for one additional remark.
One moment, you're wonderful, thanks Nala. And that really is to follow up on what was just said, enabling women who are in places of displacement to continue to be human rights defenders. It's all great that there's protection given, but protection without providing agency will not enable them to continue their work. So when they are displaced, ensure that they are given the sorts of visas and documentation so they can travel, so they can be part of these meetings, as Zarka was saying, so that they can actually continue to work in the Afghanistan context. They need to be able to communicate with women inside Afghanistan. They need to have the technological support. They need to be in places where they can have that. So we're really putting an emphasis on enabling environments for women to continue to be human rights defenders, even after they've had to flee their own countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Madeleine. I'm just received a message from Nala that she has connection issues. I'm sorry. Yeah, so I just heard from Nala that she has connection issues. So while she's working on coming back with us, I will now give the floor to our last speaker, Mrs. Brans-Killis, who is the Assistant Secretary General for Human Rights. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Gita. Also, I wanted to thank all of you who have spoken here this morning in New York today. And in particular, of course, the valuable reflections that we've had from women human rights defenders and peace builders. That's the link to the reality that we always have to keep at the core of our responses. The Secretary General stressed in our common agenda and his call to action for human rights that the ability of people to speak their minds freely, to influence their futures, is central to resilient societies. We know, however, that in too many contexts, human rights defenders must take huge risks to speak up, oftentimes even putting their lives on the line to do so. So the enabling environment that lies at the heart of the Women, Peace and Security agenda is obviously still desperately wanting. My office sees participation, and the point just made again by Madeleine and so many others this morning, my office sees participation as intrinsically linked to protection. There cannot be any sustainable peace, security, or development without the effective participation of women, we know that, in all of their diversity. But their meaningful participation simply cannot happen when they remain exposed to threats, attacks, and harassment. Therefore, in addition to an enabling environment more broadly, the participation of women human rights defenders in peace and democratic processes relies on ensuring their protection. I'm therefore delighted to see this fund will simultaneously address both needs, as was just stressed, supporting women with the resources to enable their contribution to key events, but also providing timely emergency assistance whenever needed. The flexible nature of this tool, which has been tried and tested with earlier WPHF funding windows, will also likely prove its fundamental comparative advantage. When activities are under immediate threat, they do not have the luxury, and we heard this so clearly, to grapple with cumbersome bureaucratic processes. And their individual protection needs and those related to their colleagues or loved ones vary enormously, as we know, across contexts and according to their intersectional identities as well. We owe it to those championing human rights on the front lines, and in particular to those who have cooperated with the UN, to provide them with timely and accessible funding that is responsive to their realities and can be used for whatever purpose that will protect them against reprisals. I'd like to close this launch by reiterating really a huge thanks for the hard work that has gone into making this tool a reality and open for business. At OHCHR, we look forward to supporting an initiative which will have life-changing and life-saving impact, and in turn, serve whole communities for whose rights these women fight. So we already think that the WPHF Secretariat will be receiving numerous requests, probably already now as this launch is taking place. But that is a testimony to the importance of this work and this tool. So I would like to wish you all the best of luck, Gita, and all of our support to the great work you're doing, to you and to your team. Thank you very much, and thank you. Back to Nala.
Wonderful. OHCHR, thank you so much, and my apologies for losing the connection there, but thank you for your remarks and for OHCHR's partnership and support. I'd like to just close us up today by giving a special thanks to our event co-hosts and all of the women human rights defenders that joined us today for your invaluable work and for making sustainable peace and human rights a reality for the countless people in the communities that you serve. And finally, thank you to the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund for convening us here today, for accelerating support to local women's organizations and women human rights defenders around the world, and for all of the important work that you do. If you would like to learn more about supporting the new WPHF funding window for women human rights defenders, please contact the WPHF Secretariat. Now is the time to stand with women human rights defenders by financing their protection, supporting their participation, and matching our words with concrete actions. I thank you for joining us here today.